everything, jobs, population, they all affect those two things, supply and demand. If you can interpret a market based on supply and demand, then you know where the future growth is going to be.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset and strategies. I'm Tyron Shump, and in this episode we're chatting with Jeremy Sheppard from Empower Wealth, who has created an algorithm determining where the market will grow in the future. Merging computer programming with property, follow the ups and downs of Sheppard's journey from tenants creating $13,000 worth in damage to simply taking his eye off the ball. Working for a company that provides professional advice for investors on how to build a wealthier future, Sheppard describes himself as a data geek.
I'm the Director of Research at Empower Wealth. So what that means is I'm the guy that's buried in data every week looking for capital growth hotspots that suit our clients' budgets. That's pretty much it. Just a data geek, really. Capital growth data geek.
I love that. And it's important because the data that you put together can either help people make a really informed decision or turn, different deals away. So it makes it very, very concise so that they can take action on what they need to do to fit within the budget.
Oh yeah, it's extremely important. You pay hundreds of dollars to find out about building and pest inspections before you buy a property. I mean, you wouldn't do without that. And I think just having a look at some of the data, those sort of reports, they're so cheap and they make such a difference to an investor's future with a property. It's sort of crucial kind of stuff. And it's so easy to become biased about particular suburbs. And looking at things numerically helps us avoid that sort of bias. So it's handy for a number of reasons.
In his role as a research director, what does he do in any given day?
There's a combination of things. So first of all, I spend a lot of my time doing product development. So I've got a couple of new products, new websites will be coming out in the next year or two. And there's obviously keeping existing websites running. And the key focus is to make sure that clients are fed the right property to invest in. Now, I don't actually pick any properties. I don't even go down to street level. But what I'm doing is supplying our buyers' agents with a list of suburbs that I recommend for a range of prices that suit their clients. And once a month we meet together and I do a presentation. I say, here's what's happening in the market. Here's what's happening around the country. This is business as usual. This looks interesting. Here's something more to watch. And we should probably stop getting into this market and start getting into that market. So it's those sorts of things. And it's my analysis is really just all the numbers, the numerical stuff. So I don't do any field research, but the buyer's agents cover that side. So it's sort of a merger of fundamental research and technical research that we do once a month. And then they'll go off and pick locations that are a combination. They have a good numerical, good data background, and they also have something else that they're aware of that's going on that's good. And so it's sort of that intersection of fundamental research and technical research that we do each month.
While the majority of Sheppard's accumulated data is directly towards buyers agents, there is a secondary website which was created for individuals who want to do the research themselves.
We often get people just wanting to know about locations, but my primary objective is to supply the buyers agents with those suburbs and something that suits their clients. So I don't actually have a client-facing role. I just have a computer-facing role, a database-facing role. It is all about the number crunching. But it's possible. We kicked off this website around July of last year, Location Score, and that's for some of the investors who want to do it themselves. They don't want to hire a buyer's agent, and we can't service all of Australia, obviously. So we thought, well, let's give away some of the data And that was the purpose of Location Score. They can do some quick, easy sort of research, not the sort of in-depth stuff that I do every month, but at least enough to avoid buying in a danger zone. You know, it'll flag warnings, trigger alarm bells, that sort of thing. So we do provide some of that data for the general public, but most of the nitty-gritty that I'm working on day to day is for the buyer's agents.
Initially growing up in the inner city of New South Wales, Sheppard has since moved to a different part of the country for work.
I grew up in Western Sydney. Worked a lot of my life in Western Sydney. I live in Melbourne now, but almost all of my life I've lived in Western Sydney.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting change. So why move down to Melbourne?
Well, it was for this role as Director of Research for Empower Wealth that I couldn't really pass up that opportunity. The guys here had been looking around for someone who could help them open up new markets, and I was looking to link arms with a great investment team. So it just seemed like the opportunity of a lifetime. Really, I couldn't pass up. So I left family and friends behind, and enjoying Melbourne, where every day is sunny and rainy. And actually, I don't mind the weather here. It's okay. You get to wear jackets a lot more often than in Sydney.
Living in both Mount Druitt and Parramatta, he completed his university education at UTS.
I studied electrical engineering at the University of Technology in Sydney, and before I even finished that, I was getting jobs in IT, part-time sort of work, and this is prior to the dot-com crash, and so the money was pretty good in IT, and I never actually practiced as an engineer. I became a computer programmer and started doing contract work, and then thought, well, where am I going to put my ill-gotten gains? And I started investing in shares, actually, until everything sort of came undone, and I realised I'm not a very good share investor. I really don't know which way share prices are heading. That's what got me into real estate, actually. I was looking for some other investment vehicle.
That's a very interesting story. And I was about to ask you, how did you actually jump straight into electrical engineering into IT, which is, it's a left center kind of, area that you jumped into. Because, I mean, engineering is nowhere near computer programming.
Yeah, well, I suppose it was electrical engineering / computer systems engineering. Towards the end of the degree, I chose more of the computer systems type of subjects. But it was a part-time course. So during the time that I was working, I just found it a lot easier to get jobs, computer programming. And so the hardware side of things sort of faded, and the software side I excelled in, and there were so many more job opportunities. It just became easier to move in that direction. And once you've got that on your resume, of course, it's just a flow-on effect. You've got that momentum.
In terms of jobs Sheppard undertook after university, he did a lot of contract work from a macroeconomic perspective.
There was Department of Immigration, Commonwealth superannuation. I did some work with Department of Infrastructure, Planning and Natural Resources. So it was all contract work. So it might be only a 3-month contract, or it might be a 3-year contract. But always contract work. Java programming, website programming, bit of database, that sort of thing.
What led Sheppard to invest in property was the experience of watching his shares plummeting due to an incorrect prediction. Ultimately, he now prefers the tangibility of property investing.
So I barely knew what was going on from a subject domain sort of side of things. I just had my head buried in the code. And back then when I was doing all this contracting work, I was right into shares. I was thinking this is the best place to put my money, and it all came undone. It was sort of a bit by bit thing, and then there was the 9/11 attacks, and I had a huge exposure to News Corp shares. And it's funny because the weeks afterwards it was just 24/7 news. But I would have thought if any company's going to make any money out of a disaster like this, it would be a news company. But the shares plummeted, and this was the stereotypical thing for me with shares. So whatever was announced in the media, whatever came out, I just interpreted it somehow the wrong way. Someone knew something that I didn't know, and the shares just moved in the opposite direction to what I thought they'd logically move. And that's what I find so attractive about real estate. You just have to think like a human being that wants to live somewhere, and that's really easy. It's easy to think that way. And instead of competing against share investors, you're not really competing with anyone in real estate. You're just thinking like an investor, knowing that the dominant force in the market are just people who need a roof over their head at night.
From the computing side of things, he was recommended to attend an event which showed him the way to get into property and use it as an investment vehicle.
Things went pretty ugly shares-wise, but a friend of mine said, come along to a seminar. It's a freebie. This guy's talking about shares and real estate. And I thought, well, I'll ignore the real estate stuff. I'm not into that. And I'll just see what he's got to say about investing in shares. And it was actually about writing covered call options over contracts of shares, which I thought was kind of interesting. And but then when everything went pear-shaped, I remembered some of the content about real estate, and I thought about it again and wondered whether it would be better for me to give that a go. And it was 2002 I bought my first property, and I was planning to do a reno on it and just hang on to it. And I can remember asking some local real estate agents to come in and give me a market appraisal, and had a bit of a fist punching in the air moment where I just thought, yes, it works. This is it. And I went crazy property investing.
The rest is now history. However, there has been some trials along the way. It's
been a gradual process, but there's been these penny dropping moments where I've realised, that's what I was looking for. That's why this is easier. That's why it makes sense. I didn't realise at the time. But I guess I had some unfortunate moments with shares, and things have gone fortunate for me with real estate. Although that first property that I bought in 2002, I had tenants move in almost the next day after it settled. And they didn't pay a cent in rent, and it took me almost 6 months to get them out. They were so disgruntled that they lost their free accommodation that they blocked up the drains and left the taps running overnight to flood the house. And there was, I think it was something like $13,000 worth of damage. So my point is there were some really negative moments, but when it all came together, after the reno was complete, it was a really good feeling to know that I was in control. It was something like you said that I could see, that's tangible, and I'm providing accommodation for someone. So it all felt good.
Sheppard learnt from his mistakes in the worst tenants ever, then went on to add more to his portfolio.
When I think back, those are the worst tenants I've ever had. I've bought 16 properties since then and never had as much drama as that first time. You learn from your mistakes, and that's a good thing about real estate too, that you get these opportunities to learn. I had no idea what was happening with shares. I can remember National Australia Bank, this is years ago, they recorded a record profit, and I didn't have any shares at the time, but it was on the news after trading had stopped the prior day, and the next morning the share price came down, and that just made no sense at all to me. But I know that if you've got a house that's close to schools and shops and parks and it's a quiet street, people will want to live there, and that makes sense.
I totally agree, and that's a fascinating story. Just to clarify, with those tenants, were they before you did the renovation, or was that after you did the renovation that they trashed the place?
The guy that was selling the property, he had a couple of properties in the area, and these tenants were in another one of his properties, and he was self-managing. And I wanted vacant possession because I was going to do a reno. And he said, hey, look, I've got some tenants. Do you want them? They'll move in as soon as the property settles. And I said, oh, no, it's all right. I'm going to do a reno. But there's a granny flat at the back, and the granny flat was quite new. The house itself was quite old. I was just going to renovate the house, and that's what I wanted vacant possession of. So I thought, all right, we'll stick them in the granny flat. I'll get a little bit of income while the tradies are working, and that'll ease the pain of the renovation. But after a few weeks, the tradies just said, tools down, we're not doing any more work until you get rid of those tenants. They're stealing our equipment, they're knocking off tiles, and they just refused to do any more work. So then it was approach tenancy tribunal, and I more or less inherited nightmare tenants, and that was the first lesson to be learnt, that you're not just buying the property. If there's a tenant in it, you've got to research their history, their rental history as well. And so big lesson learnt there.
There have been many other mistakes he has made throughout his journey. However, he ensures he never makes one mistake more than 6 times.
I've made a lot of mistakes in real estate. I think that the great thing about mistakes is if you've got the right attitude, you can learn from them. And so that first mistake I made was not researching the tenant. I've made other mistakes like trying to renovate a property myself. The second property that I bought was only a stone's throw from the first one, and I thought I'd pictured it like I'd invite some friends over and they might help with the reno, and I'll put on a barbecue, and it'd be like a Coke commercial, where Esky flips open, you've got ice, and it was nothing like that. Nobody turned up, and I was there at like 9 o'clock at night in the dark, just sanding, and that was terribly draining. And I realised tradies know what they're doing. They're working on this full time. They do it 9 to 5. They've got all the equipment. They do a better job than me. They'll do it quicker than me. And it's a lot like working a second job when you do the do-it-yourself kind of reno. And I decided after that second reno that's the last time I'm ever going to do a reno myself. I said the same thing after the third one and the fourth one too. So I pride myself on never making the same mistake more than about half a dozen times.
By far, his worst mistake was taking his eye off the ball when investing into particular markets.
But probably I would say my worst mistake is taking my eye off a property market that I've invested in. I might have picked a really good location for that period of time, and I've picked some regional markets. This doesn't really happen so much in the city markets, but you can easily pick a regional market which is booming and have some fantastic capital growth, but it will quite often correct. It'll come back a long way. And I've bought in regional markets in Queensland and even in New Zealand where they've had some spectacular capital growth. I've picked the right time into the market. And then it was drummed into me when I was reading the books, going to the seminars, learning all I could about property investing, that you buy and never sell. And I believe that's a mistake, that you should always be prepared to sell if the circumstance presents itself. And I had bought in some markets. I waited until I got some good capital growth and I borrowed against that equity and bought elsewhere. So my eyes are on the next market, the next boom location. And I'm sort of doing this leapfrog to just create more and more equity. But when you take your eye off those markets and they do correct, you could end up with some negative equity. And that's exactly what happened. And when the GFC hit, I had properties that were owned in the name of a trust. I was a contractor and I was sourcing finance from non-bank lenders, and everyone got scared about providing credit. So the non-bank lenders that I had, their interest rates actually went up. When all the banks here in Australia were dropping rates because we're in an economic crisis, one of my loans went up to about almost 12%, 11.85%, I remember. And so obviously you want to refinance, but everyone's lending policies have become just so much tighter. And I've got properties that are interest only in the name of a trust, and I'm a contractor, so nobody wanted to touch me, and yet my interest rates are going up, and yet prices have come back.
Sheppard then had no choice but to sell.
I had no option but to sell down a significant portion of the portfolio. And that's when I realised where are prices at? Oh dear, they've come back, and I've had to sell for a loss. So yeah, probably the worst mistake I have made is taking that advice of buy and never sell, and then taking my eyes off the market. Now, some people could argue the case that if I just bought in cities, that wouldn't have been a problem. But I mean, Perth's a city; it's the fourth biggest significant urban area in Australia. And yet, if you had bought in Perth around 2014/15, you would have had probably some negative equity because of the downturn in the resources. So you can still lose money. There's still markets that can become oversupplied. There's still corrections that can occur. And I think every investor just needs to keep an eye on the property market they're exposed to, and be prepared to let go. And yeah, that's probably my biggest mistake, locking in a tremendous amount of negative equity.
However, despite the tribulations he has experienced throughout his journey, he has also had some highs where everything seemed to click into place for him, such as how to create the wow factor via renovating. Yeah,
I've had a few aha moments. One of them early on when I was into renovating, it was just that you're trying to target a property where everywhere you look there's something that's not quite right, and it just looks ugly, it looks old, it looks worn down. And the sum of all those things makes it look like a terrible property. But if you technically look at each one individually and add up the cost, and then try and picture the property where everywhere you look, there's some wow factor. It's the effect of synergy. You know, synergy works for you when you're trying to find a renovator, and it works for you when you're flipping or selling or revaluing, in that everywhere you look there's a wow factor. And the actual technical cost of each, there's a discrepancy there. So that was like an aha moment when I was renovating. I'm looking for something that it biases me to make me feel like this property is a dog box. But honestly, if you look at it from a numerical perspective, how much it would cost to renovate, it's not that bad. And then, of course, after you've renovated and you've got some, everything's shiny and new, someone walks in and they go, oh, wow, this is really nice. And then they've got the bias where they're feeling like this property is actually worth more than what it really is.
But the most breakthrough moment came when Sheppard realised he needed to find a market where the demand exceeds the supply, inspiring his game-changing algorithm.
What I'm into now is more capital growth thing. You know, when you start off as an investor, you're trying to force the issue. You're not experienced at picking growth markets. You don't know what to look for, and so a renovation is an excellent way to sort of force the issue along, because things are in your control, and you can. It's like working a second job. Sooner or later, it's not worth your time. But the second aha moment was doing my research, trying to find these growth locations. I realised what I'm after is a market where demand exceeds supply, and it was how can I identify easily a market where demand exceeds supply. And you've got things like high auction clearance rates. Obviously, when auctions are going great, there's always a sale, then that's a case of demand exceeding supply. If properties are snapped up really quickly, that means demand's exceeding supply. If vacancy rates are low, that means demand's... And so I started looking at, in the back of these magazines, at all this data that they'd have on every suburb. And I didn't have a fear of investing interstate. That didn't bother me at all. I just wanted the right kind of market. And I thought, if this is all the data I knew, how would I interpret this metric, this indicator, this statistic from a supply versus demand perspective and pick out the best market in the country to invest in? And that's when I put my programming skills to work and wrote this algorithm to acquire all this data and piece it all together and come up with this demand to supply ratio. And that would identify markets that have the most potential for capital growth. And I guess it was just, that aha moment was, it's all about supply and demand. Everything, jobs, population, they all affect those two things, supply and demand. If you can interpret a market based on supply and demand, then you know where the future growth is going to be.
With hundreds of data sources available, merging his knowledge of property and computer programming has allowed him to overcome challenges along the way.
There's a lot of challenges with it. I mean, there's been some data sources that I've acquired and then had a close look and realised, well, this really isn't telling the story that I thought it would. So sometimes we can get a bit misled that way. I guess it's a case of picturing people in a market and what they're after and what they really want, and then how that would affect a particular metric, a particular piece of data that someone's recording somewhere. It might be just turning up to open inspections and noticing that there's a lot of couples here. Or it might be, actual auction clearance rates reported by some data source or some demographics from the ABS. But I think it comes down to trying to interpret as accurately as possible what each metric is telling you.
Initially, what held Sheppard back from investing into property was not having the essentials: a deposit, confidence, and adequate knowledge to make big decisions.
Well, obviously a deposit. It's a lot easier to get into shares with a few $1,000s. You can't do that with real estate. But I had been putting money aside when I'd been trying to push it towards a share portfolio. So I had something there, even though market had crashed and I had less than what I started with. There was still enough there to get into real estate. And of course, the first property I bought was $206,000. That's back in 2002. It seems so cheap now. Mind you, that's a good 50 kilometres west of Sydney, where I first bought. But I think, being sure of what you're doing is something that's always going to hold you back. And when I think back, comparing what I know now to what I knew back then, I do feel like I was, like a young cowboy, just trailblazing. I really didn't know what I was doing, and I can vaguely remember thinking it'll sort itself out, or I'll learn from this if it doesn't work out, or what could possibly go wrong. But fear is one of the big holdbacks, and then just that deposit. The resources, I thought, like the resources that were available for information and data back then, I didn't think that was really a limiting factor. It was more just I've got to make a decision on the information I have available, and I'm scared to, and I'm restricted in what I could buy based on the deposit that I've got.
There were some resources that he regularly turned to that aided him in gaining more confidence to start investing in property. Unsurprisingly, as a person with a background in computers, he was drawn into data.
I was always fascinated by the data in the back of the magazine. So there were two magazines back then, Australian Property Investor magazine and Your Investment Property magazine, and they had a big data section at the back. And I just used to pore over those lines of data and just think, if this is the only information that I knew, how would I pick which one of these markets is going to be a better performing one? And then there's nothing better than going and visiting a location, of course. But there's a lot of information you absorb when you go and visit a location that is subconsciously absorbed. And I think most people refer to that as getting a feel for it. They get a feel for the location. And sometimes that can bias us. There have been a lot of markets in the past that have been lower socioeconomic demographic markets that have had some spectacular capital growth, yet they've got some stigma associated with them. And some of the markets in Sydney, I remember Redfern years ago, had a terrible stigma, but it's just so close to the CBD. It's such a convenient location. That was never going to last. That was always going to be an opportunity, one that I missed actually. But yes, stigmas and getting a feel for a market and having that property data at the back of the magazines. I think I read an enormous number of books on property investing too. The point where I started feeling most confident with my investing is when I started hearing the same things from different authors. So if you read, say, a dozen property investment books and you start hearing the same thing, then you know that you've probably got things. There'll be contradictions. Every expert has different opinions about how to go about things, different strategies. And I can remember reading one book and thinking, wow, why did this author think they knew enough to write a book? I disagree with this and I disagree with that. And then I thought, okay, I've got to stop reading books and start getting out there and investing. I think a lot of people are held back by the fear, and I think it's a good thing. Sometimes, to try and get business turnover, you might hear some commentators say, "Oh, you've just got to jump in. You shouldn't get that analysis paralysis." But I think the fear is a good thing. It means that you haven't learnt what you need to learn. If you knew enough, you wouldn't have that fear. I just kept pushing, kept reading, kept absorbing until I felt confident. Of course, there are some people who are just always confident about everything they do, and that could be a negative thing. They should probably just back off and speak to someone else who will, play the devil's advocate for them.
Yeah.
But for me, me being a cautious kind of guy, I knew that I had to wait until I felt confident.
He names a few resources by authors like Robert Kiyosaki, Michael Yardney, and Margaret Lomas, amongst those that helped him in his journey.
I think Rich Dad Poor Dad, for the concept of what is an asset and what is a liability. Not so much for property investing specifically, but just you shouldn't be borrowing money to buy liabilities, and you should be acquiring asset. And what is an asset? It's not something that can be sold for cash, because you can sell your car for cash, but your car is a liability. It generates expenses and it depreciates in value. You want something that generates income and appreciates in value. Let's see. So that's a standout for just a basic concept. Actual property investing strategies, it's funny because I've been to seminars from spruikers, and I know why people call them spruikers, because this is very hard to replicate, these sorts of things. But I've learnt stuff. You can learn from just about anyone, but you just got to be careful. I don't want to pump up any spruikers, but my point is that I think it's better to get an enormous number of opinions from a wide range of experts rather than just focus on one or two. I've read books from trying to think of a standout author. I think there was a book that Michael Yardney wrote, which I thought had a good broad perspective on most things. One of Margaret Lomas's most recent books I thought was quite good. I can't remember the title, I'm sorry.
I think it was like 20 questions you should ask to invest in property or something like that. Is that the one?
I don't think it was that one. I think that's one of her more recent ones, isn't it? It was sort of towards she's written something like 8 books.
Yeah, it's a lot of books.
And I can remember. I think the first one I read I wasn't at all impressed with, but then one of her more recent books, I thought, that you're not going to go wrong by reading anything in that.
With more than a dozen properties, Sheppard has formulated an expert, data-driven strategy that he works off, including an elimination process to help him determine the top markets that suit his budget.
I probably mentioned renovations a bit too much. That's not a strategy for me anymore. It really is capital growth. That to me is the bee's knees of property investing. It's so easy if you get it right. Like, all you have to do is get your research right, and there's no backbreaking labour. Development, for example, will have some high risk, and projects blow out, and renovations are just a dumbed down, cut down version of a development. They have the same sort of risks and higher expense, and things can go wrong. But the research that you can do, when I think right now, if I had to buy an investment property, what sort of research would I do, and how much of my time would it take? And I think I could do it this afternoon and pick a property and buy and allocate some funds to it. And then I'm just sitting on my hands, and the next 3 years, 4 years, I've got enough equity to go again, assuming I can service the mortgage still. Serviceability is always going to be a limiting factor. But my approach would be, I'm looking, first of all, for a bunch of markets that have high demand, low supply. So I'm looking at statistics, because I can gather those. I can run a query against the database, and within seconds, I'm looking at the top markets that suit my budget. From there, there's some data that I can't acquire automatically, and so I would go to the council website. I'd be looking for development applications that are going to spoil supply in that market. If there's a large amount of development applications that mean new properties are being built, adding to the supply, then I'd probably scratch that one from the list. Then I look at another market and I think, it's a bit far from the CBD. There's a bit too much vacant land. Even though there aren't any development applications lodged, there's potential for a developer to go in there, clear the land, divvy up the blocks and create oversupply. So I'll scratch that one. Then I might look at another one. It's a unit market. It's a bit too easy for the house across the road to be knocked down, the one down the street, and unit blocks to go up. So I'll scratch that off the list. And I'll just keep going like this. So I've got my short list, which the database gives me, and then I do fundamental research on each one of those to scratch various markets off the list. And then what I'm left with is something that is, well, first of all, that short list has weeded out 99% of property markets. If it's like a list of even 30 properties, it's actually down to 99.9% of being weeded out. So I know that already I'm in a good position.
Yep.
And then I'll scratch markets off that list as I go. Whatever I'm left with, I'm already very confident is going to be a good market.
He says it's also important to consider the obvious drawbacks of a potential investment, such as high traffic or economic issues.
And from then on, it's just a case of, well, don't make a mistake of buying in a silly street, like one that's got maybe high traffic, or there's
housing commission.
Housing commission. And even then, you could buy in an area that has heavy housing commission, but if that housing commission has already been there for like 10, 15, 20 years, that's already been factored into the price of properties around that area. So it's not so much what's there right now, but how long has it been there? So people will always talk about buying close to parks and schools and shops and transport. But those locations don't outgrow other locations in the same suburb if all of those amenities have been there for a long time. So, for example, let's say a suburb gets a new train station. Okay, that is a significant boost. If you're within walking distance of that train station, there's going to be a period of accelerated growth that property will experience. But eventually, the benefit of being within walking distance of that train station gets factored into the price of that property, and then it's business as usual. The capital growth is just normal from then on. So it's not so much what it's near, but how long those amenities have been there. Have they already been factored into the price of the property? It's it's trying to date things rather than what things are there.
Yep.
Anyway, that's the second thing that I would do. After looking for pending supply at council website, I'd go and pick streets that I think at least aren't stupid, like having high traffic or like you said, housing commission. But if the housing commission, if I really like a property there and I know it's close to housing commission, but I know that housing commission might actually be selling rather than buying more properties in that area, then I'm okay with it.
He elaborates on what a property market looks like.
There's a couple of different ways in which, first of all, everyone knows what a suburb is, but then there could be houses in a suburb or units in a suburb. So you've got the housing market of a suburb or the unit market of the same suburb. You can also refer to a market as being, say, the local government area, or Sydney. Sydney is a property market, Melbourne is a property market. So it's like an aggregation of a large number of suburbs, or it's a specific type of property within a suburb. That's what I would call a property market.
The next steps Sheppard would take to invest in a property with potential capital growth entail communicating with real estate agents to determine why the demand may be exceeding the supply in the market he's targeting.
If I found some suburbs that are of interest to me, and I've researched the council website, and I don't believe there's going to be pending supply to ruin things, the next step would be to speak to some of the real estate agents and ask them if they have any idea of why demand is exceeding supply in this market. And really what I want them to say is nothing. There's no specific project. I think that the best markets to invest in are ones that sort of creep up on us. A lot of people are chasing after markets that are influenced by a new infrastructure project, and that might influence capital growth. It might influence it in a negative way. For example, a new shopping centre. So a new shopping centre across the road sounds great, but it could be just so noisy and congested that properties nearby are actually depreciating value. You could get too much pedestrian traffic and it just doesn't feel private anymore. And it can actually be a negative when you thought this $100 million project was going to boost values. It's hard sometimes to gauge exactly how much influence some new infrastructure will benefit. Some have more likelihood of a positive benefit than others. But for me, if the real estate agents are saying, well, I don't know, there's just heaps of people turning up to auctions. I've got 20 couples contacted me to look at this open inspection. That confirms to me that the data that I was getting about supply and demand is correct. And if they say they don't have any knowledge of anything that's taking place, then what's probably happened is gradually over a period of time, supply has been soaked up. Developers have been unable to build in the area, maybe because of zoning restrictions, maybe because the council just isn't amenable to development. The council could have easily just decided, well, this is it, this is good, we're happy with things the way they are, so we're not going to let you develop any more. We don't want any more increased density. We can't accommodate it. We don't have the infrastructure. So if the area is still desirable, gradually all that supply gets soaked up and you get to a chronic undersupply point. And it's not because of any infrastructure project, it's just snuck up on us. And that means nobody else knows about it.
An example of this is the evidence of a new airport being built in Toowoomba. Splashed off across the media and within earshot of developers, the market in that area didn't take off.
I remember it was about half a dozen years ago now, Toowoomba. Toowoomba had a new airport being built and I think a bypass, and there were lots of big projects that were believed to stimulate that area, these infrastructure projects. The problem is every developer and his cousin knew about it, and so they started cashing in on it. They thought, okay, well, I'm going to build a block of townhouses and try and flog them off because of all these infrastructure projects. And prices just didn't boom. They just didn't take off because the demand was met with supply. But if you've got a market that developers don't know about, it's not on their radar, it's not in the news, the media isn't covering it, it's just a simple case of supply getting soaked up, then that sort of market is going to last a lot longer. That imbalance where demand exceeds supply is going to last a lot longer because it takes a lot of price growth, a lot of people turning up to open inspections before a developer recognises, hey, this is an opportunity, and then they try and get in there and spoil things. So if I hear nothing from a real estate agent about what's going on other than a lot of people turning up to open inspections, then I know that's more than likely a safe market. And I don't go into too much detail about the nature of the property or the street that it's in. I think that the vast majority of the capital growth that I'm going to get is from the market in general. So I'm not fussed about having the best property and the best street. I just want to be somehow involved in the best suburb, and it will do the majority of the heavy lifting.
So what is his analysis on a growth corridor they shared publicly?
A growth corridor is probably something I'd want to avoid as an investor. It's interesting, this thing with population growth. I actually don't consider population growth statistics at the suburb level anyway to be of tremendous help. In fact, if you could identify to me the suburb with the highest population growth, that would probably be top of my list to avoid, because the markets that are going to deliver the best capital growth are more likely the markets where you cannot have any population growth. Vacancies at zero, council will not allow any new development. So how can the population in that area actually grow? The growth corridors is where developers have levelled the land and created new blocks and new buildings, and then people move into them. Then the data's recorded and you see massive spikes in population. But that's supply-based. So the population grew because of additional supply. And supply is the enemy of capital growth. I mean, people have got to live somewhere, but as a property investor, developers are our enemy. Supply is the enemy of capital growth. So a growth corridor is a population growth corridor. And when they say this area is going to have a population growth, there's going to be another 30,000 people that fill this area over the next 10 years. And it sounds all really impressive, but the way in which they do those estimates is they figure out how much land can be subdivided, how many dwellings can be added. It's all about how much can we supply to this market, to this geographical area, and then assuming people fill that, we get our population growth estimate of 30,000 people. So it's actually, when they're recorded like that, when they're published like that, it's an indicator of supply, not an indicator of demand. A lot of people picture, there's these 30,000 people lining up at the gates waiting for them to be open, and then they're going to tear in, and I want to have a property to offer them. But it's not like that. It's a supply indicator, not a demand indicator. So I would generally try to avoid population growth corridors because that's just where supply is going to be added. I'd be looking for markets where there cannot be any population growth.
With such sophisticated strategy, Location Score takes the challenge out of hunting for a property by finding the right property for you through an unbiased score from 0 to 100.
I think, the beauty about having a database of all these metrics for different suburbs around the country allows you to filter through every suburb within seconds, really. The database just does all this number crunching for you. And there's a lot of people who will look at data, and like I mentioned, population growth is a big one, and everyone seems to think that population growth for this suburb, that's really important for that suburb, and they want the highest population growth, whereas I interpret as being a potential problem. So first of all, there's interpretation of the data. You want an expert, someone who's experienced with property investing, to interpret all the data that is out there. Like you say, there's a huge amount of it. Secondly, you want that data in a consistent manner for every suburb countrywide so that you can pick out the best from the worst. And this is the beauty of having a database like with Location Score. You can quickly filter out 99% of those markets that just don't cut it from a numerical perspective. And the algorithm operates the same, whether it's in Sydney or in Perth or in Adelaide. It's consistent and it's unbiased. So you're not getting an opinion of a truck driver or a mortgage broker or an accountant. You're just getting a completely unemotional algorithm saying, here is the score, the metrics, how they stack up for this suburb, and you can compare it with another suburb. And that just gives you a great starting point for the next phase of your research, the more manual sort of research, like I mentioned, contacting real estate agents and looking at the council website. And Location Score it's a score from 0 to 100 for each property market around the country. So we look at things like auction clearance rates, vacancy rates, percentage of stock on market. So we look at every demand and supply metric, or the key ones, and we roll it up into a single, easy to understand score out of 100. Higher the score, the more demand exceeds supply, and so the more likelihood that you're going to get capital growth. And so we use Location Score in this respect. We use it as a shortlisting tool to filter through literally thousands of property markets within seconds, and the ones that are at the top of the list, we can then do our more fundamental research on.
Location Score was mostly directed towards DIY investors who wanted to avoid investing in dangerous markets.
I have friends who, they know I'm in real estate, they know I'm in property investment research, and I'm amazed they'll go out and make an impulsive buy without even consulting me, and they'll purchase a property that I probably wouldn't touch. And I think this is how most investors get stuck. They see a glossy brochure from a property developer, and they think, well, it seems like a nice idea, and then they go and make this impulsive decision, and they're stuck with it. And 5 years later, it's gone nowhere. And so, Location Score is designed to very easily, you just log in, and within literally a couple of minutes, you can see whether you've just flagged a danger zone, one to avoid, or whether it's at least okay. And then you start asking the question, well, where are the best markets? And that's when you can use Location Score's top 250 in whatever state or capital city you've got an interest in. Obviously, there's a lot more research to it, but we're giving investors for a very affordable price a very quick research tool that allows them to at least hit the ground running with something half decent.
If Sheppard were to meet himself from 10 years ago, what advice would he give?
For 10 years ago, I hadn't done any sort of data research, so I might have said something like, focus on supply and demand and big data. Big data is going to change the world. Focus on big data and supply and demand.
For the next 5 years, he's excited about the new release of the products he has been working on.
The thing I'm most excited about is the products that we'll release either later this year or early next year. I think they're going to be game changers, and they're along the same lines of Location Score, but just tenfold bigger. To me, I get a big buzz out of providing a tool that other people can use, and it changes their financial future. That to me is the most exciting thing I'm looking forward to in the next couple of years.
Thank you to Jeremy Sheppard, our guest on this episode of Property Investory.